Okay, Deuteronomy 17. A couple of things we get to learn in here. One is, of course, those who worship false gods will be put to death. There is a zero policy around dealing with idol worship. Priests and judges are to determine the hard cases. Kings are not to acquire horses, wives, or gold for themselves. The king must study the laws of God daily. So there's a couple of major points. One is idol worship. They're establishing those rules again, and Moses is reminding them one more time. This is probably like the fifth or sixth time he has reminded them idol worship is bad. You need to avoid idol worship, which is this is fascinating because, of course, what ends up causing the downfall of Israel? Idol worship, actually, when we get into Solomon's sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Then priests are to determine the hard cases. So we're going to talk about the priests who are also acting as judges to evaluate the people and what's going on. And then we get into kings. What happens if the Israelites get a king? So God knows that that'll probably end up happening because most of the other cities and countries and nations around them have kings. They have one person who basically determines how it all works, one person that interprets the law the way they want, and that's how the whole kingdom functions, is based upon how that one person interprets the law. Uh, so God's going to give some advice and tips on what to look for, what to do with a king. So this is fascinating too, because if you remember in the Book of Mormon, we have they do have a king that rules for a while, and then they want to go away from the Book of Mormon. Leaders try to move away from a king. Remember when King Mosiah, none of his sons will take the kingship, so he puts in a system of judges to rule the people rather than which is a bit more of a democratic elections, uh, separations of power to an extent, a way that one judge can't have absolute power. There's always somebody who can judge them, basically, and hold them accountable. So a fascinating type of concept for government back then that King Mosiah brings in the Book of Mormon. But here, the Israelites are going to move away, of course, from having a prophet as their leader to having a king as their leader. As we get into 1 Samuel, we'll learn more about that. So let's jump in here. All right, verse 1, thou shalt not sacrifice unto the Lord thy God any bullock or sheep wherein is blemish, or any evil favoredness, for that is an abomination unto the Lord thy God. So that just reminding people that the sacrifice, the animal that gets sacrificed, has to be without blemish. Firstborn, remember. Verse 2, if there be found among you within any of thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, man or woman, that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of the Lord thy God in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun or the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee that thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, and the thing certain, that such an abomination is wrought in Israel, then shalt thou bring forth that man or that woman which have committed that wicked thing unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone them with stones till they die. So if you are an idol worshiper, that's capital punishment, basically. So it's interesting that it talks about here in verse 4, you have to inquire diligently over this. So you can't just, oh, so-and-so accused you of being an idol worshiper, I guess we go kill you. It's not that easy, as we're going to learn here in verse 6. Out of the mouth of two witnesses or three witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. But at the mouth of one witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witnesses shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So thou shalt put the evil away from among you. So you can't just have one accusation against you. If one person accuses you of being an idol worshiper, that's not enough. They have to have evidence of it. Multiple people have to have witnessed you worshiping a false idol. So this is a way that they're helping prevent people from manipulating the system. It doesn't stop it completely, because if three people team up to manipulate the system to get you killed, they can. The other interesting thing that's important to look at in here is realize that the people who are the accusers are to stone them first. They're to throw the first stones, those who are the accusers. So they're the ones that aren't guilty of this, but are now stoning the guilty. So this is an important point, I think, that's for us to look at, because if you remember in the New Testament, the Savior talks about this when a woman is found in adultery and they bring her to the Lord to test him, not her, test him. And he says, he who stands blameless before God, let him cast the first stone. So he's taken this idea, which was institutionalized through Israel over time, and he basically points out that none of you are righteous enough to stone this woman, for condemn her for what she's done, basically. So that's kind of a really interesting thing, because in here again, they want to prevent people from manipulating the rules to just get their neighbor killed that they hate. So there has to be two or three people that actually have witnessed this, and the witnesses have to stone them first. So that will stand as a witness against those people if they falsely accused somebody because they started it. So they make it pretty clear in there. So there's not an easy way to mistake that, basically. Now, verse 8, if there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, between stroke and stroke, between matters of controversy within thy gates, then shalt thou arise and get thee up into the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. So this is like regarding degrees of manslaughter, like how bad was it? Was it, a little bad, really bad, things like that. Is if you look in the footnotes, that's what it's talking about. So if you have really tough decisions you have to make, like big judgment calls, it's not very clear and easy to decide this. Then he's talking about go to the place where the Lord thy God shall choose. So basically, you go and you have a place where you can talk with others, or you can seek guidance, or even the Lord's help. So verse 9, thou shalt come unto the priests of the Levites and unto the judge that shall be in those days, and inquire, and they shall show thee the sentence of judgment. So this is, again, the priests also acted as judges. Okay, remember, the priests, the Levites, have no property necessarily in Israel. They don't have an inheritance. They're reliant on the people giving them food and things through the sacrifices. So they have a bit of a neutral perspective on what else is going on outside the temple, basically, because that's their job, is to be at the temple and work there all day. They're also going to act as the judge, a judge in Israel, basically, to make these judgment calls as to who's guilty, who's not, what do we need to do. Verse 10, thou shalt do according to the sentence which they of that place, which the Lord shall choose, shall show thee, and thou shalt observe to do according to all that they inform thee, according to the sentence of the law which they shall teach thee, and according to the judgment which they shall tell thee, thou shalt do. Thou shalt not decline from the sentence which they shall show thee to the right hand or to the left. And the man that will do presumptuously, and will not hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord thy God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die, and shall be put away all evil from Israel. And all the people shall hear and fear, and do no more presumptuously. So these, again, this is talking about following the guidance of the priest. To help out, the priest is the judge, and so you follow the judgment of the priest. The point is, the priests should know the scriptures. They should be really focusing their lives on coming to Christ and having that ability to make a more accurate judgment, because they're following the Spirit. They're following the guidance of God to help them in making these judgments. Now, we actually have this principle still in effect today. These judges are also called bishops. So this is basically, the bishop in today is following the same idea as what the priests of Levi followed back then. They are known as the common judge in Israel. So you can take your disputes to them, you can utilize them to help out, but you need to follow their advice. Follow what they say, because their job is to seek the Lord, to seek his guidance in doing this and helping to judge righteously. And this is what it comes down to, basically. So we still have this principle in effect today in wards and stakes, with bishops and stake presidents, basically. Verse 14, when thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, so this is getting the promised land, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. So this is getting into the kingship here. Verse 15, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. one from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayst not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. So he's saying here basically, it has to be an Israelite, okay, that does it. Can't be a stranger, and basically the Lord should choose who the king is going to be, because the Lord knows the intents of the heart. The Lord knows the people better than the people do. If you don't follow this isn't going to be good, but you really should seek the Lord's guidance in appointing a king. If you want a king, the best way to do it is to have God help you know who to pick. So use revelation and inspiration to pick your leader. Okay, so there are rules that he puts forth here to deal with this king. Verse 16, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord has said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. So they're not allowed to go back to Egypt. So if a king wants you to go back to Egypt, then that's not who you want as your king, basically. Now, why would horses be a difference maker in this? Why would God be so worried about a king getting more horses? So a king that has lots of horses isn't somebody, or trying to get more horses isn't somebody you'd want to have. Well, in Clark's Bible Commentary, Volume 1, page 783, he said this. He said the use was forbidden lest the people might depend on a well-appointed cavalry as a means of security, and so cease from trusting in the strength and protection of God. So the idea of increasing your horses was basically building your army. So not just having horses so you can ride around the countryside, so that you can have transportation or things like that. What he's talking about here in verse 16 is building an army. So if a king builds an army, he relies more on his army and less on God, because he believes he is in charge, he is in power, he has the power, he can make those differences, which we see all the time in ancient history. The bigger the army, the more power you wield, the more authority you gain, and the more you can exact what you want out of everybody else, basically. It's always about fighting in armies and preparing yourself and arming yourself, basically, and having more power than others, and power over their life. Because if I have enough people that I can kill you easily, then you're more apt to follow me, so you don't die. Is what that comes down to. A very basic principle here, and I think there's a lot of foundational, fundamental concepts that this is speaking to, that also help us understand some foundational principles of the Second Amendment. But here's the point. The king is to rely on God. The people are to rely on God, not rely on man. So they're not allowed to amass a large army, basically. So let's move on with what Clark says here. He says, and that they might not be tempted to extend their dominion by means of cavalry, and so get scattered among the surrounding idolatrous nations, and thus cease in process of time to be that distinct and separate people which God intended they should be. So building an army not only makes you stronger, more powerful, but makes you want to gain more stuff like land. So you start fighting more, which is a lot of death. And then you start getting into these situations where you love again people more than stuff. And you start having more problems, and you start having more complications with what you're doing. So those are things that we need to avoid. And that's why you need to not build a big army. You can have an army, but you can't have a lot of it, so that you are reliant on God to help you fighting. And if you have a smaller army than most countries around you, you're less likely to be the aggressor nation as well. More of a defender nation, which means God can step in and help you. So this is important. The king cannot amass an army, basically. A larger army, can't keep growing his army, basically. So verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So the king cannot have multiple wives, and he cannot do anything that amasses wealth to himself. He can't use his position to make himself wealthier and better, okay? Can you imagine through history what it would be like if people actually followed that? Oh, man. For one, Solomon ran into this problem. David ran into the problem with the wives, unfortunately. Man, a king that actually is not trying to improve himself, his stature, that's phenomenal. So the Lord is saying, you've got to set this up in a way that if you use a king, this is, we have absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you've got to keep this person in check. These are the things they cannot do. They do this, this is bad. They're going the wrong way. Verse 18, it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests and Levites. So he is to basically have a copy of the laws of God, the scriptures. In verse 19, he shall be, and it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. So he is to read the scriptures daily. This is part of being a king, basically, is to read these scriptures daily, so that he knows the scriptures, and so he understands and remembers God, and not moves his faith away from God. So verse 20, this is the reason here, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. So again, he is not to love himself or his stuff more than other people. He is not to make himself bigger. Now, the beauty is there's really one king that we can point to that has followed this, and this is King Benjamin. If you remember in the book of Mosiah, King Benjamin talks about how he worked, he labored to take care of his needs. He didn't live on the taxes of the people. He took care of his needs. He took care of himself. He didn't try to be a major wealth building king. He just tried to take care of the people and help them have a good life. And we can see that when he gets into his final speech, which in a way is really a year-right speech that he gives. He still follows a lot of tradition in that speech. But outside of him, we have lots of other examples, unfortunately, of kings who did not do this, who didn't follow this advice. So again, the overarching theme of this chapter really is understanding how do we go towards Zion and less Master Mahan principle. Those are the two philosophies that are very they're opposite each other. Master Mahan principle, loving stuff more than life, that started with Cain. And then Zion, which is loving people more than stuff. Okay, that's kind of the continuum we're on, and God wants to help them move towards loving people, not loving stuff more than people. So thanks for watching. Hope you're really enjoying these videos. Share them, like the videos, share them out to get more people to watch them. Our goal, again, is to just help more people learn and understand the scriptures and help demystify and simplify understanding these teachings so that we can have a better understanding of what God wants for us. So thanks. We'll see you in the next chapter.